using Arabidopsis thaliana to understand plant responses to climate extremes from genes to organism. This work was jointly supervised by Professor Ivan Janssens and Professor Araza. Earth's climate is changing, and climate change is a very complex phenomenon which involves rise in the CO2 emissions and associated temperature increases. This graph represents low emission scenario of carbon dioxide and the middle emission scenario of carbon dioxide and the higher emission scenario of carbon dioxide. And here in this axis you can see that in the future, at the end of the 21st century, there will be approximately 4-degree rise in the Earth's temperature. This is not only the case. If you see here, the annual mean surface temperature of the Earth in the middle of this century, we can see the Earth is the temperature of the Earth is quite higher, and the condition is even worse by the end of this century. So we see that in the future there will be extreme high temperature of the Earth, which will lead to the detrimental effects for the plants, for the animals, and all the living organisms residing on Earth. So what are extreme climate events? Extreme climate events are the events which are rare in any particular place and time of the year. And there are various examples of the climatic extreme events like heat waves, drought stress, cold snaps, heavy precipitation, hurricanes. And it has been also predicted that in the future there will be higher frequency and intensity of the climatic extremes. In the natural environment, various environmental factors like CO2, water, and the light energy interact with the plants. And in optimal conditions, these environmental factors are necessary for the plants to synthesize food by the process of photosynthesis and release oxygen. But when the conditions are adverse, for example, heavy water in form of flooding, or there is scarcity of water in the form of drought, these environmental factors are detrimental for the plant growth. And there are other environmental factors like heat and cold, which influence the plant growth and reduces the crop productivity. And there are various other examples of the environmental factors like highlight, UV, ozone, heavy metals, and salinity. As I mentioned earlier, that in the future there will be extreme high temperature on the Earth. So in this presentation, I will mainly focus on high temperature stress in the plant. So how high temperature or how heat influences plants? So there are different responses, and these we have categorized on the basis of the organizational level. The heat results in reduction in growth, crop productivity, and the inhibition of, for example, seed germination, water loss through transpiration, and inhibition of photosynthesis and oxidative stress. And what are the defense mechanisms which are used by the plants to cope with these detrimental effects? The plants perform various physiological and molecular activities, like there will be change in the orientation of the leaf rolling, and there will be transpiration and cooling, and there will be alteration in the membrane lipids. So, and there will be accumulation of the osmoprotectants like sugars and amino acids, so they can compensate with the water loss. There will be expression of the specific proteins like heat shock proteins, which help plants to cope with heat stress. And to cope with oxidative stress, plants produce antioxidant system. And oxidative stress is one of the environmental plant response which occurs during the heat stress. So, what is the cause of oxidative stress? As I have shown here, various environmental factors, including heat, produce reactive oxygen species. What are reactive oxygen species? These are highly reactive molecules like hydroxyl radical, singlet oxygen, superoxide anion, and hydrogen peroxide. And these we have categorized on the basis of their reactivity, which oxidize various cell structures or macromolecules of the cell. To cope with these reactive oxygen species, plants produce different antioxidant molecules. Like molecular antioxidant, we have ascorbate, glutathione polyphenols, and tocopherols. And in the form of enzymatic antioxidant, plant produce superoxide, dismutase, catalase, ascorbate, peroxidase, and peroxidases in general. So what happens in normal or optimal conditions of growth? The reactive oxygen species are produced, by normal, for example, photosynthesis process, and to scavenge these reactive oxygen species, the antioxidants are produced. So there is a balance between the production of the ROS and the scavenging of the ROS by the antioxidant system. But under severe environmental condition, the oxidative load or the ROS production is higher and the antioxidant system is unable to scavenge the ROS, which results in the oxidative stress and which results in the oxidation of the lipids, proteins and DNA. So during this PhD, we asked several research questions. For example, what is the impact of combined heat wave and drought stress on plants, and how future CO2 alter these responses? And number 3, what are the metabolic responses of heat wave and drought stress over the stress exposure time? Number 4, how will selection for heat stress resistance affect heat stress responses in the progeny? So here we performed one multi-generational experiment. So now I am giving you the overview of the experiments which we have done during these studies. So I performed 2 experiments with Arabidopsis thaliana. The first experiment, we grow plants under controlled condition in the presence of optimal supply of CO2 and elevated CO2, where we have the CO2